Hello there, everybody. This is your social studies teacher, Mr. Nunn, speaking to you all. This is our next set of notes as we continue to learn about the creation of the United States Constitution. So far in our second half of Unit 4, we've looked at a few key people, some key vocabulary terms, which will definitely pop up as we continue to progress through Unit 4. We took some notes on some compromises, looking at the Great Compromise, which dealt with the creation of our two-house Congress. The upper house, the Senate, is where we're going to receive 2 delegates for each state, which satisfies the smaller states. And then the lower house, the House of Representatives, is going to be based off of population, which satisfies the wants and needs of the larger states. The second compromise we looked at was the 3/5 compromise as to how the slave population can count towards the southern states' total population, which will increase their control inside the House of Representatives. We also looked at the need for a Bill of Rights, and we also looked at the location of the nation's capital. Thinking back to issue number 3, we were introduced to Federalists and Anti-Federalists as we were looking at the idea of, do we need a list of rights added to the Constitution? We won't get into that quite yet today, but we will dig a little bit deeper about these Federalists and Anti-Federalists. On top of that, we are going to be looking at some powers that the Constitution is going to create for both the national government and state governments. So just like you've done before, at any time throughout this video, if I'm moving too quickly, feel free to pause it so you're able to copy it down. It's important that you keep track of notes because at the end of the unit, in the day we take our test, I will be collecting these notes for a notebook grade. So let's go ahead and dive into today's activity. So when we looked at the need of a list of rights for the American people, we were introduced to a group of people known as the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. As we look at the Federalists, I believe the most significant thing is to look at what they stand for. If you're a Federalist, you believe that the Constitution is the new government that is needed to allow the United States to be successful. The key idea here is that this Constitution is going to be a lot more stronger compared to the Articles of Confederation. A lot of our important American founding fathers believe the Articles was too weak, which allowed us to struggle for a few years after the Revolutionary War is over. When we talk about the Federalists, there is a handful of key individuals that kind of come to mind. We have individuals such as James Madison, George Washington could be classified as a Federalist, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, are just a few well-known American men that had this idea that we need a strong national government. To help persuade the public and to convince individuals in state governments to ratify the Constitution, the members of the Federalists wrote 85 essays known as the Federalist Papers. The goal here was to just persuade individuals to ratify the Constitution by stressing the basic concepts of the Constitution and really answering questions that American people might have had when dealing with a strong national government. So the Federalist Papers is something that's well known. We should have time next week to look into more details about those papers. But as of right now, the Federalists are just a group of people that favored the Constitution and wanted a strong national government. And as I just stated, they wanted to persuade people by writing these Federalist Papers, 85 in total. Roughly 29 of these essays were written by James Madison, 51 was written by Alexander Hamilton, and the rest was done collectively between those two and a guy named John Jay, who we'll talk a little bit more as we get into the topics of Alexander Hamilton. Again, the whole idea here was to rally support to help adapt the new Constitution as the new law of the land. As we deal with the Anti-Federalists, it's kind of the complete opposite compared to the Federalists, right? So the Federalists wanted to replace the Articles of the Constitution, as these Anti-Federalists just wanted to rework the Articles of Confederation. The Federalists wanted a very strong national government, and the Anti-Federalists wanted an extremely weak federal government. On top of their viewpoints on government, they also had different ideas about kind of who are the best people. If you're a Federalist, you're probably an individual from a big urban city, a businessman, manufacturers seem to be associated with Federalists. Anti-Federalists are going to be seen as the farmers or people in the rural area. Some famous, well-known anti-Federalists is Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, George Mason, Sam Adams. This whole idea about lessening or kind of eliminating the power of the national government and keeping most of the power dedicated to these individual states. The one big issue that they're having, besides the idea of, this big creation of a strong government, was that they're worried about individual rights and liberties, right? Something that we looked at the other day as we looked at the compromises. The anti-federalists believe that we are trending towards a problem in regards to an oppressive government that is going to infringe upon the individual's rights and liberties. And the only way that the anti-federalists will start to support the Constitution is if there is some type of documentation that states and lists the individual rights and liberties granted to the American people. And without that list of rights and liberties, the Constitution probably could have failed and never became ratified. We'll talk more about the list of freedoms as we get closer to the end of this unit. But the list that they're thinking of is known as the Bill of Rights today, which is the first 10 amendments of our Constitution. So Federalists and Anti-Federalists, two groups concerning the Constitution. This can also be seen as really our first political parties, because after we create this Constitution, it gets ratified, and we start to hold these elections, outside of George Washington, we're going to have political parties start to form to create interest amongst the other people. But the one thing that the Constitution does is it kind of creates this idea of federalism. And what it really does, it creates two things. So the idea here is that, at least during this time period, we have this concept of like dual federalism, where both the states and the national governments are going to work together. So what this does is, the first idea is that it's going to give powers to the national government. Whenever we talk about the national government, we can also talk about the central government. We can also talk about the federal government. So if we're going to create federalism and there's going to be power between both the national and state governments, there's going to be certain powers only delegated to the national government. We're also going to see that we are still going to allow states to have these powers, right? The Constitution is not going to take away individual state rights. It's going to take away a little bit more powers that the states had under the Articles, but it's going to hopefully create kind of a happy medium between the national government and the individual state governments. And we'll kind of start looking into these individual powers given to both the federal and the state level, but also concurrent powers that are shared between the two. So the federal or the national government can be used either way. It means the same thing, are going to have this delegated powers. And these delegated powers are specifically laid out within the Constitution, right? The idea here is that we want to make sure that we're listing powers and responsibilities to each government in the United States, whether that's national or state, so that we are not going to become oppressive, right? Or set up a tyrannical government, which a lot of anti-federalists believe that was going to happen. So as we just look at the delegated power, these are only going to be the powers reserved for the national government. When it comes time to dealing with foreign nations and declaring war, that's only the power given to the national government. To be even more specific, it is the power given to Congress when dealing with declaring war. It is not a power given to the president. It's a power given to Congress to decide whether or not we can declare war. Usually the president will come give a speech to try to persuade Congress to declare war, but at the end of the day, Congress has the opportunity to make that decision. The second idea is issue money, right? We think back to the young United States following the Revolutionary War. Individual states could really do whatever the heck they wanted. A lot of states printed off a whole bunch of paper money that was worthless because of lacking reserves in gold and silver to make their money worthwhile. So the goal here is that we kind of have this system of standardization so that whatever currency you have maybe in Georgia can be used in upstate New York. So they're going to be in control of circulating money and setting that standard. Regulating trade, right? Another power that was not given to the national government underneath the Articles of Confederation, right? They now have interstate commerce, right? They can regulate trade between, one or more states. They can deal with trades with foreign nations, right? The idea that we can start issuing tariffs on imported goods to make those imported goods more money compared to goods that are made here in the United States, right? To drive the economy. So now we have the chance to regulate trades. And then now we have the ability to make treaties, right? These treaties are going to focus on foreign nations, but also these treaties are going to be used in regards to Indian tribes and nations, something that we'll continue to discuss as we progress through the rest of the school year. So here are just a list of 4 basic abilities that the national government has in regards to delegated powers. Looking at the state governments, we're going to see powers known as reserved powers. So these powers are only going to impact their individual states and at the smaller local levels. Some of these are extremely basic, common knowledge for most people. So if it deals within your state, you have the ability to set certain laws to protect and govern your state. One idea could be trade within your borders, right? How are you going to handle trade between different areas within your given state? So that's a power given to them only within their state, not to get confused with the interstate trade ability by the national government. They have the ability to conduct local elections, right? You're going to start to have local elections at the county level, and then you're going to have elections at the state level. So they get to set up and regulate their own local elections to happen within their given state territory. They're also going to have the ability to establish public schools, right? So as we talked about during the Articles of Confederation, we were introduced to the concept of the land ordinance in the Northwest Territory, which really set the requirements of organizing territories to become states. And within that area, it's required that you establish a free public education. So the individual states are now responsible for really orchestrating their own public school systems. There's a lot more other powers that are given to these individual states, but that's something that we can dive into later as we continue to progress through the school year. And now with federalism, you're going to have the ability to have very similar powers for both the federal and the state governments, and this is called concurrent powers. And this is not going to be the full detailed list of these concurrent powers, but it's just the basic powers that a lot of people should be able to understand. As you have the ability to start, applying for part-time jobs and you start making money, you're going to get those paychecks and you're going to see, well, geez, a lot of my money is being taxed. You're going to have states that have, income taxes, like the state of Illinois. You're going to have states maybe like Florida who don't have an income state tax. So the ability to decide what's taxed is at the state level. At the federal level, you're going to have to pay a federal tax. And remember, all of this tax money is supposed to be used to benefit the United States. At the federal level, it can be used to establish programs or healthcare, Medicaid, Social Security, our defenses. We're looking at programs that is going to be able to benefit the American people. When you're raising money at the state level, right, that could be for road maintenance, or you're going to give money to local agencies like law enforcement to kind of benefit your area. So both powers are going to have the ability to tax American citizens to raise money. And the significant thing at the early start of this is that we need to tax the citizens so that we're able to raise money to pay off our deficits. The item number 2 is that we have the ability to put criminals on trial. There's going to be laws set by the federal level, and then there's also going to be laws set at the individual state levels. And depending on what type of crime they committed, they can be held at state levels, or it could be seen as a federal court case, and that can go to the federal level. So we have the ability to set rules and laws and to carry out those individuals that have broke a certain law. The third is that we're going to build roads and bridges, right? We want to improve infrastructure, and we'll talk a little bit more about infrastructure as we start to discuss about how the American people are going to start moving out west, right? We're going to have a national road. We're going to make canals, railroad systems, right? That's all kind of considered infrastructure. And a lot of this is going to be done by the federal government, and usually the maintenance of that is going to be done at the state level. And then idea number 4 is that whenever there's a problem between the federal and the state government, and they're unsure about who's in the right and who's in the wrong, or who has control over this issue and who does not, we go back to the rule book, and that rule book is the Constitution. And we check the Constitution, and we figure out, which branch of government, I guess you could say, whether that's the federal or state level, is going to have the ability to carry out that certain thing. So this is a real quick lecture that kind of talks about the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, the idea of federalism, right? The shared responsibility of governing the United States with the national governments and the state governments, and just a quick little overview on some very common powers delegated to the national government, reserved for the states, or seen as concurrent between the two levels. What you need to do now is make sure that you have all these notes copied, and then you're going to go back to Schoology and complete my simple note check activity, and then you're done for the hour. And I hope you see you guys very, very